Hi, this is Ben Cousins, and you're watching the YouTube version of my talk from Game Horizon this year, which is called How Much Money is Failure Going to Cost You? I've been in the games industry for about 15 years. I worked on lots of games. I started in QA in 1999, moved through level design positions into game design, project and studio leadership. Most recently, I worked as head of European studios for a big company called DNA. And I'm now an independent consultant specializing in free-to-play and mobile. And you can check out my website at www.bencousins.com if you want more info. Many of those games I've worked on over the years have been successes, but many have also been failures, and today I'm going to talk about failure. Now, we all know that in the majority of games nowadays are not profitable. This can't be possible. We've got 1 million iOS apps out there, 1.2 million Android apps, and about 10 million Facebook apps. And of course there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of PC, console and browser games. And we all know that the vast majority of revenue in the industry tends to be concentrated on a very small number of games, which must mean that the vast majority of games out there are not profitable, are not financial successes. I believe that games aren't successful because they don't resonate with consumers, and resonance is a concept I would describe as an opinion that's made after just a few seconds or a few minutes of gameplay. So like this guy, like Columbo, consumers operate with a real gut reaction. They play a game and they very quickly form an opinion of it. And we didn't really know how quickly people formed an opinion of games until we started to analyze player behavior at a large scale with digital games, with free-to-play games. Most games actually fail in seconds or in minutes. With a traditional pay-before-you-play game, if that doesn't resonate with a user, then you're going to have poor reviews. Journalists make their mind up about games very quickly if you ask them. But nowadays, of course, everyone in the public is a reviewer, and it's very easy for you to pick up a new game, to play it for a little bit, and then to quickly go on Twitter or on Facebook or on any number of social media to describe how bad you thought the game was. And we see a lot of games nowadays very quickly dying a few days after they launch because the social media feedback is so bad. If a free-to-play game doesn't resonate with users, well, it won't be able to retain users. And if you don't come back and play the game, if that game doesn't retain you, then it's very difficult for that game to get you to spend. So in a world where there's so much content available, it's just so easy to abandon a game and then to just jump onto the next thing, whether that be a game or another app. So how do you avoid making products that don't resonate, that don't give the consumers that positive, immediate gut reaction? I used to work in a market research call center, and there were 2 pay grades, and I, like everybody, tried to optimize my time to get more completed market research surveys and therefore a higher rate of pay. The first thing I tried to do was to focus on quality with each caller. So with each caller I would try and persuade and cajole and flatter them into taking part in the survey. And I realized something simple, that there are some people out there in the world, in fact the majority of people out there in the world, when someone rings them, they just don't want to take part in market research surveys. It doesn't matter how long you spend persuading them or flattering them. However hard you try, they're just not going to be interested. So I changed my tack. Based on that realization that the majority of people don't care, I started to move through my phone numbers as fast as I possibly could, to dial the phone really quickly, to speak quickly, and to get to the point quickly. And this worked much better. The tiny minority of people out there who are actually interested in taking part in market research surveys, I was able to get to them faster. I was able to succeed by failing fast as I possibly could. So it's a little bit more like diamond mining than sculpture. This is a diamond mine on the left in Siberia, and there's a guy working on his stone sculpture. And if you think about it, both miners and sculptors try to create value out of rock. Sculptors spend a long time trying to make something valuable out of a single piece of rock. Months or years, in some cases, creating these beautiful objects. But sometimes the sculpture fails, sometimes it cracks, sometimes it doesn't come out like they intended, and sometimes the person that was promising to buy that sculpture might not like it. Diamond miners, on the other hand, they're still trying to create value out of rock, but they do so by ploughing through the waste rock as fast as possible to get to the value, which is those diamonds that lie in the rock. And the faster and cheaper the miners get through the waste rock, the faster and cheaper they find diamonds. Miners kind of admit that they're not in control, that they're discovering more than creating value. So, how do miners and telephone market researchers avoid failure? Well, they embrace it. And if you start to look at some really smart people and some really successful people, they have very common views on failure. This is Edward de Bono. He invented the concept of lateral thinking. It's better to have enough ideas for some of them to be wrong than to be always right by having no ideas at all. Don't be scared of being wrong. Wayne Gretzky puts it even more eloquently. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So keep making shots, and some of them are going to go in the goal. Churchill talks about the enthusiasm that you need to retain as you move from failure to failure, searching for success. Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. This is Andrew Stanton. He's the director of WALL-E and Finding Nemo over at Pixar, and he says in a recent book about Pixar that my strategy has always been be wrong as fast as we can. And this is Pixar's attitude. They try to create product ideas and film ideas as fast as they possibly can, and to fail as fast as they possibly can. Coco Chanel puts it the most eloquently. Don't spend time beating on a wall hoping to transform it into a door. You're never going to get through the wall at that point. That's a blank piece of wall. You're much better off admitting that you've failed and trying to find a door instead. This is Supercell, one of the most successful games companies of recent years. They celebrate success with a beer, but they celebrate failure with a glass of champagne. Let's see what the most influential tech thinker of the last 20 years has got to say about failure.
Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask, and that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act, and you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. You know, with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
So why am I interested in failure, and why am I talking about failing? Well, as a business person, you should always be interested in anything for which the price is dropping. You're looking for bargains in that cost/revenue calculation. And if you've spotted a bargain, there's a good chance one of your competitors hasn't spotted it. And there's a good chance that competitor is wasting money. And you've got a chance to build a better business than them by either offering the consumer cheaper prices or by getting better margins. The price of failing in the games industry is one of those things for which the price is dropping. And the price of failing in the games industry is dropping very quickly. What do you mean by the costs of failure are dropping, cousins? You're being pretentious. Specifically, what do you mean by failure in this instance? It's about the cost of simulation. So the Air Force here, they spend money on training a pilot to a testable level of completeness. And then they spend money on building a simulator that represents the real world to an effective degree. And at this point, they can test the potential of that semi-completed pilot in the simulator. And if that subject succeeds in the simulation, then they make the rest of the investment to complete him as a pilot. Now, you might not know what this is. This is actually an AS simulator. This is used by the furniture testing industry to simulate years of usage of furniture. This plastic bottom is attached to a mechanical arm which presses down on a chair thousands and thousands of times over. So what they do is they spend money on building a chair to a testable level of completeness, and then the furniture company spends money on building a simulator which represents that real world AS to an effective degree so that they can test the potential of that chair. And if that chair, the subject, succeeds in the simulation, then they invest to complete it. So when I say this phrase, the costs of failure are dropping, what I actually mean is two things are happening. Building a game to a testable level of completeness, that's getting much cheaper. And building a gamer simulator that represents the real world to an effective degree, and effective is the key point there, that's getting much, much cheaper as well. The second is more important, building that gamer simulator to an effective degree. Now, everyone in the games industry is desperate to exit the packaged goods business, bundling up discs or cartridges and putting them in boxes and selling them in stores. And this is mainly because the cost of failure in this model is too high. Both building testable products and effective simulators is high, but the most significant cost is that simulation part. Building testable products is cheap because my experience tells me that good games succeed or fail based on a gut reaction to core mechanics. And experience also tells me that polish doesn't really add much fun to a core mechanic. And this is why these simple mobile games, which seem incredibly unpolished and incredibly unfinished if you're a core gamer, how these games can become some of the most popular entertainment products in the world. So a testable product can be built with a very, very small proportion of the final dev budget. And I think this is the case for games of any size. Perhaps with 1 to 5% of the final budget, you have actually a testable product, which will tell you whether your game is going to succeed or fail. Now, in the days of packaged goods, the cost of getting that cheaply produced prototype to a representative and statistically significant audience, which I would say is between 5 and 10,000 people, was really, really high, because you had to manufacture the discs, put them in boxes, distribute them to all of these people that were going to test your game, and then you had to spend a lot of money on research to find out how they reacted and how they felt about that game. Now, because of this high cost of testing these games at that scale, the packaged goods industry has to rely on much less accurate simulations of customers. Here's one of the simulations that they used. Employees who are considered experts in predicting consumer behavior. So we know what these sort of people are. They're development or marketing executives. They might be rockstar game designers or project leads who claim to be able to predict or create a hit without the influence of a customer, without having to run tests. Now, these people are extraordinarily rare, and they're therefore very, very expensive. But they're also not particularly accurate, and it's easy for them to pull the wool over your eyes and to blame others for failure, or other circumstances for the failure of their prediction. Another thing you can do is commission a mock review by a journalist. Take a game and have a journalist write a review of it. Now, the problem with this is that journalists are really good at predicting critical successes, but they're not particularly good at predicting commercial successes. Think about all those games that have got high ratings but have not sold particularly well. Another simulation you can create of a consumer is to run a playtest. Get 10 or 15 people from the local area in to your company, sit them down, give them some beer, give them some pizza, have them play your game, and then ask them what they think about the product. The problem is that your sample size is generally too small. There's not enough people involved in this test. They're going to be from a very local area. They're going to probably have a specific kind of attitude to gaming. And people aren't really honest in these circumstances. It's an artificial environment. But because of tradition, many old companies still use these old, inaccurate methods of consumer simulation, and that's why it's so expensive for them to find hits, and why they also have such expensive misses that can often bring down whole companies. The internet, though, represented by this picture of a data center, has massively reduced the cost of distributing those testable products and collecting the usage data around those products. You don't need to run surveys and you don't need to send out disks. You can send that game out digitally at almost zero cost, and then you can run analytics on those games to see how the consumers react remotely. So the cost of the accurate simulation has dropped massively. And we see this as the modern concepts of beta tests, or of soft launches, or of the concept of early access to games. And this is currently considered the best practice. Companies that do beta tests and soft launches and early access, well, they think of themselves as being really modern. But I believe these games are too complete. Remember, I believe that games can succeed or fail based on the prototype, which would be 1 to 5% of the entire dev budget. I think you can get representative results from a much smaller investment. I don't think companies that operate beta tests or early access are being aggressive enough. So who has the best practices? What's this game? If you said Candy Crush Saga, you'd be wrong. This isn't Candy Crush Saga. This is Candy Crush without the saga. This is the version which was very cheaply produced and first put on royalgames.com, which is King's browser-based destination website. King have got over 100 games on this website. Now, people think of them as being a one-game company with Candy Crush Saga, but they're actually a 100-game company. And what they do is they take the games like this, very simple, just based on one core mechanic, and they test to see if people come back and play the game again, to see how long people play the game for, to see if people repeat playing that game over and over again. And the games that do really well in that simulation will go over to Facebook, where they'll get the Saga treatment. So that's more levels, progression, they'll get social features, they'll get a story, they'll get some polish, and they'll do tweaks to the monetization. So that's a big change and a big investment from the original, very simple mechanic-based version. Now, only the games that do the very best on Facebook will then get the mobile treatment, where the real money is, where the highest ARPUs and also the highest cost of acquisition are. So King are probably the big company that failed the cheapest. 100 failures becomes $1 billion blockbuster, but I still think they're spending too much money on that failure process. I still think that those games that they put on King.com are a little bit too polished, a little bit too complete. So let's finish by spending a couple of minutes talking about an even cheaper way of doing this. A way that you could theoretically build a $1 billion games business with a full-time staff of less than 20 people. Best way to describe this is with a graph. And the vertical axis in this graph is people. Each one of those tiny little squares represents one person allocated to the game. And the horizontal axis is time. So this curve represents the increase in the amount of people allocated to a game over the course of its production. Now, if you look down at the bottom, you can see that for a long time there are 0 people allocated to this game. So how on earth can you start creating games with no people on your staff? It's simple. You encourage the public to submit prototypes. So let's imagine this theoretical company. Let's say this is a new Nintendo idea. Nintendo say to the public, submit prototypes for new Nintendo games. Use Unity or Unreal. Just spend a few hours or a few days creating a simple mechanic. Think Flappy Bird with just blocks. Think Threes with no polish. Think Clash of Clans just running with text or placeholder graphics. So the public submit prototypes. And why would they submit prototypes? Well, you should say to them, if your game's a hit, if we take your game to market, then you're going to get a cut of the revenues. You're going to get a cut of the profits. So then you take those hundreds of publicly submitted prototypes and you take them through a rapid pre-screening process. And at this point, we've got about 1/5 of a person allocated to the product. And this means that we'll have 1 person or 2 people or 3 people very rapidly going through the publicly submitted prototypes and screening them out, making sure they don't infringe anyone else's IP, making sure they're not offensive, and making sure that they work. There are analytics embedded in these prototypes. That's part of the standardization that we need from people who've submitted them. And that means that we can put these prototypes as they are, as submitted by the public, into a destination website or a destination app, which aggregates all of them together. Think of 100 minigames or 200 minigames available on your phone, on your computer, on your browser. We only need a few thousand people to go there and play these games. I said maybe between 5,000 and 10,000 people need to play each game for you to get statistically significant data about them. So this becomes the simulation. Analytics enables us to use these simulations to rapidly test these prototypes which have been submitted to us. And at this point, we're allocating maybe 1/2 of a person onto each individual product because we need to analyze the data around them. So this is the fail point. There's an extremely small amount of money been invested by the company before they know whether they've got a hit on their hands. Because believe me, if we've got hundreds or thousands of games being submitted, think about a game jam, that kind of level of participation, there will be very obvious spikes in terms of the games that people play the most, that people come back to play, that people play for longest, and that people are really committed to. So you'll very clearly see some standout games that are going to be hits. And at this point, you can be pretty confident. This is where you can start to invest a bit more money. So maybe you put 3 people on each game and those people do a full game design and a full plan for the product, and you review that and you tweak it. We're still investing only very small amounts of money here. Now at this point, you can take your product, I believe, to a work-for-hire studio. You don't need to have the capability to build these games in-house because you have in-house teams to tweak games, to fiddle with them, to try and make them fun. But if you've already discovered a fun mechanic which is going to be the core for your game, then you don't necessarily need to do that development in-house. You can do the management of the development and the tweaking of the development and the marketing of the product in-house, but you don't need to do the development. So then you take that game to the soft launch or to the beta, you tweak it, you improve it, and you can be pretty certain that you're going to have a great game that gone to a full launch. The reason that you know it's going to be a great game at full launch is because it was the one prototype that survived 100 tests or 1,000 tests, simulations of real users done at an incredibly low cost. And this is completely possible today with modern technology. So in conclusion, most games aren't a success. There's thousands of games out there, millions of games out there. They can't all be profitable. Games fail because the consumer reacts negatively very rapidly. Within seconds, within minutes, they decide they don't like the game. And if they do that in big enough numbers, then the game won't succeed. The cost of simulating that reaction used to be really high to try and get a statistically significant proportion of users to play your game and determine whether it was good or not, but it's getting cheaper all the time. The surprising thing is that even the most modern companies are spending too much, I believe, and I think there's an opportunity for $1 billion business with less than 20 full-time staff. Thanks very much for your time.